All right, let's focus on the Khashoggi case. Pressure is growing on Saudi Arabia to give a full explanation of what happened to Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Khashoggi has been missing since last Tuesday when he entered the Saudi consulate in Turkey in Istanbul to obtain paperwork so he could remarry. Turkish officials believe he was murdered by Saudi agents, but thus far the Saudis have denied this. Khashoggi is a critic of the Saudi government who's written about the country as a correspondent for the Washington Post. He is now a U.S. resident. Several countries are calling for a response, while U.S. President Donald Trump has threatened severe punishment against the Middle Eastern kingdom. The fallout could affect oil prices and does have implications that could reverberate around the world, including in South Africa. Now, meanwhile, the United Nations' top human rights officials have called on Saudi Arabia and Turkey to reveal everything they know about the disappearance of Khashoggi, the prominent journalist disappearing after entering that consulate. He hasn't been seen or heard from since. The statement from the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, comes as U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo traveled to Riyadh earlier today, where the two governments agreed on the importance of a thorough, transparent and timeous investigation to provide answers.
This is a very, let's say, fresh, hot story. We don't know the facts. They haven't been established, but obviously establishing the facts is extremely important. I would say that, first of all, this would be the responsibility of the involved states. Certainly the state that has jurisdiction over the piece of territory where the events are alleged to have taken place, being Saudi Arabia, and also certainly also Turkey. If no solution can be found in conducting a credible and objective investigation on that level, then perhaps at some point international mechanisms should get involved. I think we're a little bit early in the process to come to a definite conclusion there, because obviously this is a very delicate issue, and I think we should give the involved states time under public scrutiny to come to a conclusion as how they want to address this problem.
All right, let's cross now to our U.S. correspondent, Sherwin Bryce-Pease. Sherwin, what specifics are we now hearing? Mike Pompeo from the U.S. has been meeting with the Saudi king. Anything more in terms of detail?
Well, let me just read you the statement that the State Department issued after that meeting, Francis. They confirmed that he met with the Crown Prince and the King, the Secretary reiterating the President's concerns, that's President Trump's concerns with respect to Jamal Khashoggi's disappearance, as well as the President's desire to determine what happened. I think you'll hear that from officials around the world. Let us establish the facts. They're waiting for those facts. They want to find the truth. The Secretary General, the Secretary, I beg your pardon, welcomed Saudi Arabia's support of Turkish authorities. The Secretary and the Crown Prince agreed on the importance, as you said in that intro, of a thorough, transparent and timely investigation. What I will point out are the words, Francis, of a fierce Trump ally, Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina. He appeared on Fox News this morning, a show called Fox and Friends, and he made some very, very bold statements. I'm going to quote him here. "I'm not going back to Saudi Arabia as long as this guy is in charge." He's referring to the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. "I've been their biggest defender on the floor of the United States Senate. This guy is a wrecking ball." This is a sitting United States senator saying these things. Senator Graham continues, he had Khashoggi, he's referring to the prince, he had Khashoggi murdered in a consulate in Turkey, and to expect me to ignore it, I feel used and abused. The MBS figure is to me toxic. He can never be a world leader on the world stage. It's up to the president, but what I would do, well, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to sanction the hell out of Saudi Arabia. The words of Senator Lindsey Graham, a fierce Trump critic. He has the ear of this president, and clearly you're seeing from within the Republican Party on this issue a great deal of pressure being placed on the United States administration. How President Trump, of course, will react to this, anybody knows. As Bongani pointed out, President Trump made clear that while, if the facts confirm that the upper echelons of Saudi Arabian political society is involved here, that there would be a severe punishment. The Saudis, of course, hit back on that and saying there will be repercussions for any action taken against them. But the broader point here is that President Trump is also reluctant to impose any punitive action against the Saudis because of a over $100 billion arms deal they've signed with the Saudi Arabian royal family. So a lot of different things, a lot of balls in play, a pressure on the domestic front, the president not wanting to undermine that bilateral arms trade agreement, and of course a general consensus among international leaders that the facts need to be established here.
So you're talking about this growing pressure, also human rights organizations weighing in, wanting, it sounds like an immediate investigation. How viable is that?
Yeah, you just heard earlier from the special rapporteur on torture, a guy called, I've got his name here somewhere, Niels Meltzer. And the question we put to him is whether he would support that type of investigation. We understand Human Rights Watch, the Committee to Protect Journalists, possibly Amnesty International and others to formally make that call for a United Nations-led investigation. But perhaps we have the second clip queued up, Francis, of the spokesperson of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, and what they would like to see happen in the near short term.
Today, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, is urging the governments of Saudi Arabia and Turkey to reveal everything they know about the disappearance and possible extrajudicial killing of the prominent Saudi journalist after he visited his country's consulate in Istanbul. Enforced disappearance or murder, if that has occurred, extrajudicial killing, either way, those are very serious crimes. So, the one thing we really know as a solid fact is that Mr. Khashoggi went into the consulate and he never came out again, or was never seen coming out again. So it seems very probable some crime or other has been committed. We all need to know what it was and how it happened and who's responsible and where the evidence leads. In view of the seriousness of the situation surrounding the disappearance of Mr. Khashoggi, the High Commissioner believes the inviolability or immunity of the relevant premises and officials bestowed by treaties such as the 1963 Vienna Convention on Consular Relations should be waived immediately.
Sherwin, I mean, talking about
and
what
we also put a question to the Secretary General spokesperson.
Carry on.
If I could just finish the point, Francis, we spoke to the Secretary General spokesperson a short time ago, wanting him also to weigh in on the matter. They kind of hide behind the High Commissioner for Human Rights on these kind of controversial issues. They say they're watching closely. They want the truth to come out. And once the truth has been revealed, they'll be able to comment further. Francis?
What I was asking you is, he was talking about what the Turkish officials know, and I've read numerous reports, Turkish sources believing they know exactly where the journalist Khashoggi, his name I forgot there quickly, but where he was killed, how he was killed. They wanted access, and they finally gained access to the consulate. What do we know?
Worth noting that he went into that consulate, Francis, on October 2nd. It is now October 16th, so 2 weeks. The evidence that might have been found in the consulate, 2 weeks old, but we can now tell you that we are seeing reports, among them the Associated Press, saying that they've heard directly from Turkish officials that went into that consulate, and they have found evidence there confirming that Khashoggi was pointing to the fact that Khashoggi was killed in that consulate. What we're also now hearing is that the Turkish Consul General, essentially the person in charge of that consulate, has now left the country. Officials representing governments abroad, diplomats as we call them, they tend to have diplomatic immunity. And that is why you heard from Rupert Colville from the Office of the High Commissioner calling specifically for treaties such as the 1963 Vienna Convention to be waived. And it's those treaties that provide this type of protection for diplomats. But the guy that might have been able to explain what happened at the consulate, what happened at his home, because Turkish officials have video of movement between the Turkish consulate and the Turkish consul general's home. That official has now left Turkey and I imagine has returned to Saudi Arabia by virtue of the fact that diplomatic immunity was not waived in this instance.
What about the reports that Saudi Arabia itself may be preparing to issue some sort of statement saying this could be an interrogation gone wrong?
Well, this was something that emerged immediately after President Trump had a conversation with King Salman a few days ago. Initially, President Trump had said there'll be severe punishment, and then suddenly the narrative of rogue elements emerged within the intelligence establishment of Saudi Arabia. But you'll also remember, Francis, that the Saudis initially said they knew nothing about this, that they were not involved, that they had a clear conscience as it pertained to this case. And so the narrative seemingly continues to shift. What Lindsey Graham, the senator from South Carolina, has also said in some of his remarks on local media here, and I'm just getting out the right document, he also said that he has seen published reports, Francis, that the Crown Prince himself approved the interrogation and rendition of Khashoggi back to Saudi Arabia. We now know that that hasn't happened, and that the intelligence official who was a friend of the Crown Prince killed the journalist. This is a United States senator making these statements. He's clearly seen something. He's gone on the record on national television here saying that the Crown Prince and an affiliate of the Crown Prince, a senior intelligence official, he has seen documents, this is Lindsey Graham, that this intelligence official under the instruction of the Crown Prince committed these acts. So this is going way up here, and it's going to be very interesting to see how the United States, the superpower of the world and one of the staunchest allies of Saudi Arabia in the region, is going to respond to these revelations.
Well, you're talking about senior officials leaving, and there's so many unanswered questions. So 15 Saudis apparently arrived in Istanbul the day he disappeared, and very conveniently, the cameras showing people walking in and out of the consulate weren't working on that day.
Well, we have actually seen some video material of certain Saudi officials arriving. What the Saudis have said, and I've seen this is by virtue of watching several reports. This is not something that we, as the SABC, can confirm, but we've seen reports that several officials arrived. The Saudis are saying these were tourists. They arrived, some of them with their families, and they were basically on vacation. Look, I mean, there's going to be a lot of speculation around this, and this is why senior officials, whether you're talking about the UN, whether you're talking about senators in the United States, whether you're talking about governments around the world, we have to establish the facts. We hope that there can be a transparent, credible investigation. It's certainly what the State Department has called for. It is what Mike Pompeo is talking about in the region right now. And it's until those facts and the culmination of this investigation, Francis, that we'll be able to have clarity that we certainly hope to share with our viewers.
And finally, Jamal Khashoggi was apparently once an advisor to the Saudi government, fell out of favor. He's been writing for the Washington Post. Do we know in the manner in which he was criticizing the government, what was he saying about Saudi Arabia?
I don't know the specifics of I do know that he was an advisor to the royal family, so he had an inner understanding of how Saudi society operated, and he became, by virtue of that knowledge, a fierce critic of the royal family and the government there. We understand that he was living he was for all intents and purposes under asylum in the United States, so he had sought protection in the United States and was granted that protection, wrote for the Washington Post, had returned to Turkey where his fiancée was from, and had applied for marriage documentation from the Saudi authorities, was told to go to the Saudi consulate, that the documentation he had sought was ready for pickup, and of course went in that day, left his cell phone with his fiancée outside, and by virtue of her testimony, she also wrote an opinion piece in the Washington Post this past weekend explaining the struggles that he had faced and how he really wanted to return to Saudi Arabia, but of course going into that consulate on October 2nd and not coming out, Francis. But there's a broader point. You know, we had a briefing here with various experts on torture, and one of those experts is a gentleman called Sir Malcolm Evans. He's the chair of the UN subcommittee on the prevention of torture. And we were talking about, you know, the impunity and how you hold states accountable if, in fact, the allegations against Saudi Arabia are proved. And he made the point that there's a bigger narrative that is being hidden by this high-profile story. And it is the behavior of governments around the world. We are now in a state of affairs. And let me just read. He said, increasingly states do feel that it's not necessarily problematic for them to be seen to be breaching some fundamental human rights if they determine, Francis, that it is what's in the interests of the state to do so, then perhaps there is a more generic movement that perhaps given something of a green light that we have to be more vigilant about. And he's talking about a green light that we've become, it's almost accepted now that people will die in the course of protecting the interests of the state. And because it's happening everywhere around the world, we should not lose sight of the fact that this is a broader problem than just one journalist being killed. And because it happened in a foreign territory, in the domain of the Saudi Arabian consulate, we should be, and given the high-profile nature of that, we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that this is probably happening more widespread, certainly around the world.
All right, thank you for your insight, Shu and Bryce Pease, reporting live from the United States. So one of the questions, as he said, is will US President Donald Trump act against Saudi Arabia?